Hello, everybody. Welcome to our event. Welcome to our webinar panel titled Afghanistan, How We Got Here and What Lies Ahead, hosted by the Multicultural Center here at Sacramento State in partnership with the Afghan Students Development Club and the Department of History's Middle East and Islamic Studies program. We are glad that you are here today. My name is Kayla Johnson. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. And I am a graduate assistant for the Strategic Student Support Programs at Sacramento State. It's my pleasure to be with you today and share this virtual space. Before we start our panel, I would like the audience to complete the following poll, which will appear on your screen in a second. And I'll give you a few moments to complete that. Okay, great. Thank you for participating in that poll. So before we begin, I would like to recognize and continue the tradition of community and stewardship of the original inhabitants of the land that Sacramento State is on. Sacramento State Strategic Student Support Programs give honor and respect to the Native ancestors that cultivated the land and to the Black and Brown Indigenous labor connected to this territory on which we gather. Our campus operates on the traditional and ancestral homelands of the Miwok, Wintu, Maidu, Nisenan, and Patwin Native peoples, and sustains itself by the hands of past and present African, Asian, and Latinx Indigenous labor. Recognizing their culture that is rich with spiritual ties to the land and waters, we celebrate the importance of acknowledging the original stewards of the land and ask that we consider our ancestors and our relationship to the land that we are on. All right, so before we get started, I wanted to give a quick overview of today's briefing and go over a few housekeeping items with everybody. We're going to start with the panel discussion, which will go about 50 minutes or so. After that, we will shift to the Q&A. You can use the chat box or the Q&A function. Feel free to enter these questions throughout the presentation and direct message them to me. For everybody's information, this event will be recorded and posted on the Strategic Student Support Program's YouTube channel. If you are a Sac State student looking to receive Leadership Initiative credit for this workshop, please make sure to complete the virtual sign-up sheet, and that link will be put into the chat box right now. Now, without further ado, I would like to welcome Patsy Jimenez, Program Coordinator for the Multicultural Center, to say a few words about the mission of the MCC.
Thank you, Kayla, for that introduction and for this introduction and for everyone for joining us today. And also for helping us honor the original inhabitants of our university's land. My name is Patsy Jimenez, and I use pronouns she, her, and ella, and I am the the program coordinator for the Multicultural Center at Sacramento State. In alignment with the MCC's mission, this educational program, Afghanistan, How We Got Here and What Lies Ahead, aims to support the needs of diverse communities by providing educational programs and welcoming space that helps students learn about themselves and others. By partnering with multiple campus and community entities to co-create diversity and social justice initiatives, the MCC is committed to responding to student needs, building bridges for fostering social awareness and cultural understanding of our communities. We are happy to have you here with us today. Now, I would like to introduce Dr. Viridiana Diaz, Associate Vice President for Strategic Student Support Programs, to offer opening remarks. Dr. Viridiana Diaz oversees several equity affinity programs and centers that include the College Assistant Program, Migrant Program, CAMP, Dreamer Resource Center, High School Equivalence Program, Multicultural Center, Serna Center, Price Center, Women's Resource Center, and the Career Center. Please help me welcome Dr. Viridiana Diaz.
Thank you, Patsy, for that lovely introduction. I use pronouns she, her, and hers. Thank you, everyone, for joining us for this program. While I wish we were in person, I am so happy to see over 100 participants connected to this event. And I can tell you from many, many virtual events that I have been involved in, that is incredibly successful and very high numbers during COVID virtual times. So thank you so much for being here. And I am so proud of our unit, Strategic Student Support Programs, and the Multicultural Center for offering programming that is timely and critical to our understanding of global events. As a member of the Sacramento State and the greater Sacramento community, it is extremely important to me that our programming be informed by current issues affecting our extended communities abroad, but also here at home. I like to share a quote by the Dalai Lama that reinforces to me the importance of panels such as this one. And the quote reads, "We have all been born into this world as part of one great human family, rich or poor, educated or uneducated, belonging to one nation or another, to one religion or another, adhering to this ideology or that. Ultimately, each of us is just as human being as everyone else, and we all desire happiness and do not want suffering." This also means that we are all connected by our common humanity, and events occurring across the globe connect us as a human race and directly and indirectly impact all of us. I hope that today's panel, Afghanistan, How We Got Here and What Lies Ahead, is educational in nature, but I also hope that you leave today with knowledge on how you could potentially get engaged and how to better support the Afghan community during these very trying times. On the same note, I do want to extend my support and thoughts to those in the Afghan community, including any Afghan students on our campus. We stand in solidarity with you and your loved ones. We will continue to find ways to support you by remaining informed and engaged. And we want to remind you that Sacramento State is your home and your family. I would like to also take a moment to thank Kayla Johnson, our graduate assistant for our unit, Strategic Student Support Programs, for planning this program, for doing the research and all the behind the scenes work, but most importantly for ensuring that all the right people from Sacramento State, but also the community at large were involved, consulted, and included in this dialogue. I want to thank the Multicultural Center for hosting. I want to thank Dr. Patrick Ettinger for serving as the moderator, and of course, an incredible panel that you'll be hearing from today for sharing their time and knowledge with us today. Now it is my pleasure to introduce the moderator of today's panel, Dr. Patrick Ettinger. Dr. Ettinger is a professor in the history department here at Sacramento State. His research, publishing, and teaching revolves around the history of immigration. He recently created the exhibit City of Refugees in Sacramento, 1975 to the present, which was based on oral history interviews that he and his students conducted with refugees. His academic interest in refugees led him to begin volunteering with the Refugee Resettlement Program of Opening Doors, a Sacramento nonprofit of which he joined the board of directors in 2020. I personally known Dr. Ettinger for, goodness, maybe over 15 years. Many of you may not know that I have a master's degree in history. I am a geek when it comes to history. It's my passion. I love it. I have had the pleasure of taking many courses from Dr. Ettinger, and I also had the honor of having him serve as my thesis chair when I was doing my master's in history. So I know that he has a personal passion for this work, and I thank him greatly for getting involved with our unit and centers and for the work that he does as a professor, but also in the community. Please help me welcome our moderator, Dr. Patrick Ettinger.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Diaz. It's always a pleasure to work with you and work with your talented staff. And I'm honored to be as part of this panel, and I'm very excited to lead us through a discussion. And thank you all for taking the time to come here to learn more about the context of Afghanistan, but really to learn about the experiences of Afghan refugees. And as Dr. Diaz and others have said, to learn about ways that you can get involved in that work. This community has a long history of receiving and welcoming refugees. And as I walk across the campus and teach my students semester after semester, and I see the Vietnamese American and Cambodian American and Laotian American and students who've been here, brought here from the Balkans or Russia or the Ukraine or Iraq, we have a long history of receiving and welcoming refugees. And I think it's very important on this campus in our community that we all be educated citizens about what's going on and how we can be involved. So I'm delighted to be here, and I'm delighted to introduce this fantastic panel that we have before. So let me introduce them individually, alphabetically, and I guess we'll bring them up on the screen as they're interested. As I introduce them, I'm going to start with a student, a current student here, Ahmadi. Is originally from Afghanistan. He came to the United States in 2014 after completing his high school degree. He currently is a student in his senior year at Sac State. He's majoring in international relations with an interest in economic and sustainable development programs. He's very involved in the Afghan community here in Sacramento, which includes his role as president of the Afghan Student Development Club at Sac State, and we'll learn a little bit more about that later. Ahmad, thank you for joining us. It's a privilege to meet you and hear your story. Our second panelist is Usama Khalil. Usama Khalil is an engineer by profession with a very successful career in the design of medical technologies. But in addition to that day job, he's also CEO and founder of the Refugee Enrichment and Development Association here in Sacramento. And REDA is a nonprofit that strives to address the needs of the refugee and immigrant communities in the Sacramento area through culturally sensitive programs and critical services. He's done fantastic work, and I want to welcome him and thank you so much for your work and for joining us today. Third panelist is a fellow faculty member here at Sac State. Dr. Zahar Razavi is an assistant professor in the Department of Political Science. Her door is just literally down the hall from mine. Her research interests include Middle East and North African politics, race, ethnicity, and politics and gender and politics and diaspora, as well as transnationalism. In fall 2020, she was slated as director of the Iranian and Middle Eastern Studies Center here at Sacramento State. And Professor Razavi, thank you very much for joining us here today as well and helping us to get a little context of the situation in Afghanistan. And finally, before we get to the questions, I'll introduce Gulshan Yousafzai, and I hope I got her name correct. I doubt it. She is a native of Afghanistan, whose early childhood was interrupted by the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan and subsequent displacement of her family as refugees to Pakistan. So as a very young child, she was a refugee. She came to the United States as a 9-year-old, settled in Sacramento, earned a bachelor's degree in political science and government across the causeway at UC Davis. And she has devoted her life to community development and social services. She's worked for the California Institute for Mental Health and as the deputy director of the California Network of Mental Health clients. Since 2013, she has worked as the executive director of the Muslim American Society Social Services Foundation, and that's where she works today as an executive director. Welcome, finally, and thank you for your work. We are also very honored to have you with us. And I think now we're going to get all the panelists.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Ettinger, for the introduction. We appreciate the opportunity to be here with you and with your wonderful audience who are taking the time to actually spend a few minutes to learn about this very, very important topic. And I really appreciate that you bring this knowledge to our community. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all. Well, I'm going to start off with kind of how we got here. How the modern state of Afghanistan got to this moment is, of course, a very profound and deeply historical question rooted in a really complex history that we cannot begin to do justice to in a panel today. But that said, we do need some context for understanding the flow of refugees that we are talking about today. And I want to start off by asking my colleague, Dr. Razavi, to start us off with her thoughts. And just to be clear, Dr. Razavi is not a specialist in Afghanistan, but she brings to our panel an expertise on recent American foreign policy in the Middle East. And for students and community members not entirely familiar with the recent history of the United States and Afghanistan, I'm wondering if you can provide some context for us to understand the refugee crisis that we're talking about today.
I would love to. Thank you. Thanks to Dr. Edinger, thanks to Kayla and MCC and everyone here. I really appreciate being invited to this panel, and I'm delighted to see so many people participating. So I want to reiterate before I begin with the background information. I want to reiterate I'm not a specialist on Afghanistan. I'm not here to speak for Afghans or anything of that sort. And I really want to say, I want to acknowledge also that there is a long history of Iranians and specialists on Iran kind of engaging this odd Persian chauvinism toward Afghans, which also is relevant for the broader context of Afghan refugees around the world. So we here all want to be very careful not to contribute to that overall history. So I do, however, want to talk about the war on terror, and I want to talk about how destabilized Afghanistan has become really over the last 40 some odd years, which has brought with that destabilization has brought with it multiple waves of refugees, of migrants leaving Afghanistan. And so when we're now talking about multiple generations of families who have seen their homes and their homeland either destabilized or completely decimated. And that is not without its long-term repercussions. For those of you who don't know, the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan in late 1979, and what followed in the 1980s was a profoundly destructive civil war in Afghanistan. And that ended with the Taliban rising to power. And we're more familiar here in the United States with what has transpired since the US invaded in late 2001. And something that I think doesn't get enough discussion here in the US is an acknowledgement that also on the first day of the US invasion of Afghanistan, that also brought with it the first day, marking the first day of the first drone strike, the first drone operation in the Middle East. So what we have seen is that there's been a broader process of dehumanization here in the West, not just of people who are subject to the war on terror, but also Afghans in particular. And this is not only seen in the United States through popular culture, through policy discussions, through everything from formal to informal, right? We have the laws, the legislation, the actual military operations, popular culture discussions, not only in the United States, but also in the region. There are an estimated 3 million approximately Afghan refugees around the world. The vast majority of those are in Iran and Iran and Pakistan. In Iran, there's been a sort of demand for seasonal workers, and a lot of the rhetoric around Afghan workers and Afghan refugees in Iran is highly discriminatory toward Afghans. A lot of it parallels and echoes some of the things that we've seen here in rhetoric about immigrants, and particularly when we see the discussion around workers. So later on, I want to talk about maybe some of the more specifics of the drone policy and how that has impacted the way that we see Afghans and refugees as a whole. There is a strong connection between the two, but I also I'm cognizant that we have limited time and everybody wants to. It's really important that we get to every aspect of this discussion. So, in the broader context of dehumanization and Islamophobia that Afghan refugees find themselves here in the United States, they also have to contend with a loss of home and also broader support for the war on terror among the American population. And so we see a lot of hostility and a lot of even unconscious, obviously there's quite conscious bias in a lot of cases, but they're also contending with communities that aren't always as welcoming as Dr. Edinger, how you've described Sacramento to be. Unfortunately, it's not always the case. So popular support for the war on terror remains high. And the most recent crisis that has been precipitated by the US pulling out of Afghanistan has brought with it a new wave, a new kind of crisis point and a point of inflection. So I'll stop there, and maybe others can also respond to this, and we can circle back to some of these points later if necessary.
Thank you very much. That was a very thoughtful framing of a very complicated and long and deep situation. And as a historian, of course, we hear echoes of the results of American power in Southeast Asia, then generating refugees. And there's a long tradition, if you will, or that's long been the case. And understanding what the American role has been in Afghanistan is absolutely crucial to, as you say, to understanding the refugee experience. So thank you for framing it that way. I would like to get back to your comments about drone strikes in human rights. But now I'd like to ask a question of Ahmad. Ahmad, you arrived in the Sacramento area in 2014. And when you were still in high school, I believe. Can you speak for a moment about one or two of the greatest difficulties that you and your family experienced after you arrived here in Sacramento?
Oh, thank you, Patrick, for the opportunity, and thank you, Kayla, and everyone for this great event. Yeah, sure. So basically, when I arrived in the United States, during high school, so the difficulties of most of Afghans refugees, including me, we had this was language barrier, communication, and cultural and religion issues. These are the programs that high school do not provide for the students or for immigrants. So it was a
And can you talk a little bit about your parents' adjustment as well, or your family beside language? How
yes,
is it?
so we also had a couple. We also had we also had a finding affordable house and familiar with the government law. These are the typical issues or difficulties we all Afghan family have when they are after the United States. And so in many families, when they are after the United States, they are like they come as one head of a family, which make them difficult to continue their normal lives, and a lot of family have this issue. But right now, if you talk about the current situation in Afghanistan, we have two different type of refugee immigrants. So the ones they are like under SIV cases, which are typically those who work with the United States or government or US military, they are receiving they are receiving some granted assistance, healthcare, food stamp, and cold fresh for a couple of months. And they are like, okay, but the majority of the evacuation people who recently came from Afghanistan to the United States, they've been, and some of them are in the military camp based on their status. So they are going directly. They are either going directly to live with the family members who are in here, or in the military bases to find them affordable houses to live. But in this case, they are not receiving the same assistance as the SIB program do. They don't have a full coverage medical. They are not having all the assistance from the government. And so in this case, we actually don't know what's going to be, how hard for them to live in the United States. And but a lot of non-profit organization, they are looking forward to help them. And those who are already connected with the government department, home department, they have a contract with them. So we'll see. Right now, we don't have any family to the Sacramento area to California because before the source, before the evacuation start, the California government stopped the immigrant entry to the state. And right now, a lot of family, they are still living in the military camp, and they are waiting to complete their screening, their background checks, their vaccination before they go out from the camp. Yes.
Thank you. I want to point out to our listeners that the special immigrant visa program that he referred to is a program that Congress created to, as they did with the Iraq War, to offer refugee status to those who operated with the United States, who helped the United Nations, the other allies of the United States during the war in Afghanistan. And foremost, I think on a lot of people's minds in the Afghan community right now are their loved ones back in Afghanistan who may not have, who do not have that same path out. Thank you very much, and it's good to hear your personal experiences. I want to turn now to a couple of the other panelists here, Gulshan and Usama. And you both know this, but I want to hear your thoughts. When refugees arrive, they receive practical support for a month or two from resettlement agencies, such as Opening Doors that I work with, or International Rescue Community. But that really just covers the basics, right? Of kind of finding a place to live, enrolling your kids in school, getting access to healthcare, some social services. And then typically that's a month or two, and that's not much. And your organizations in different ways both specialize in providing services and advocacy for the Afghan refugee community in our region. And I have for the last couple of years picked up families at the airport, driven them to clinics, helped them register for school. And it's profoundly moving. And what is on your mind all the time is, what would happen if I was going through this experience? You just can't help but think, what would it be like if I was moving my family to this place? And the levels of trauma and the levels of difficulties they face. So I wonder if you could each say something, and maybe I'll start with you, Gulshan, about the practical problems that refugees face in the months and years after they arrive.
Sure. Thank you, first of all, Dr. Ettinger, for moderating this panel, much needed panel, as well as to the other panelists and MCC and Kayla for making this happen. It's heartwarming to know that so many are present, and also to the ones that are watching. Thank you for your time and wanting to learn about how to help Afghans. With that said, yes, I think just to give a little bit of context, I'm going to just talk about very briefly. I know we're all limited on time here, about how this whole thing happens, and then to allow for what I'm about to say to make sense. So, as you may all know, generally when refugees are sent to the U.S., they're sent to 5 resettlement agencies here in Sacramento. From there, those 5 resettlement agencies, one of them being Opening Doors, does 3 things for them within 3 months or less, and that is connecting to the health system in terms of just have to housing first. So having a place where they can live. Second, getting them checked out in terms of mental health and other health challenges they might have. And that's through the Refugee Health Clinic through Sacramento County. And then third, connecting them to benefits. And that's generally how it goes. And that's how it has happened even since 2014 when a lot of refugees arrived, or when I was a kid and we came through in the same way. What's different this time is that because of the crisis that occurred, you still had SIVs come in through the same way, which are the interpreters and so forth that work with the US government. And it could be in anyone, not just interpreters, anyone that worked with the US government in the last 20 years. However, this time, the big challenge and the big difference is, along with what we all saw on TV since August 15th, is that a higher number of individuals from Afghanistan came in without any status. And so that's why there's huge numbers of them coming in. The problem that this presents for everyone, including and especially for those that are coming in, is that they had no status. So that's why the government, US government, was trying to figure out, what do we do? Because they would not qualify for the benefits that SIVs or anyone with status would get. And that's why those the 3 things I just named would automatically support them for the 3 months. So there was some time, and that's why they're in the military bases. And I believe at this point it's about 58,000. And in terms of Sacramento, 1,700 have arrived, 5,000 will be coming. And so for those reasons, the ones who had no status now are able to apply. They have about 150 days to apply as asylees, and then they'll be able to get these benefits. So once this all happens, they get here 90 days. The settlements do a really good job of trying to connect them to all these services and get them settled. However, the problem is that that is just the start. And the real issues, from what I've seen with my work with the Afghan community and Muslims in general and refugee and immigrants in the last 17 years, is that the real problems start after that. Once you have all these main basic things that are set up, then you got to figure out, how do you survive in a country that you have no idea about their culture, you don't speak their language, and anyone that talks to you, majority of the services are not presented in a culturally competent manner. And how do you deal with that? When it practically comes to it, as husband and wife, you are put in an apartment and with your kids, and we all know Afghan families have large numbers of family members. They love having big families. So after that, you're able to, to actually integrate into the community is extremely, extremely hard. Something as simple as getting food that's kosher. In Islam, Muslims eat kosher food, knowing where that is, or connecting with the school systems. How do you do that? How do you make sure that your child has what they need? And yes, there are case managers within the resettlement agencies that support them. And it's not that the resettlement agencies just help them for 3 months and drop them, but the real support that's needed to survive and have a life in the US, it's extremely difficult as they settle in. And so I'll talk more about the trauma and everything that comes in slowly after those 3 months in a little bit. But in my experience, personal and professional, the real problems for these families start after the 90 days. And that's where everything they've gone through, whether it was back home or here, because the trauma continues. That's when it starts to show its I guess you could, for lack of a better word, its ugly head, whether it is for that Afghan woman who has gone through lots of trauma, or the male, and then especially the children. Because that's the one I can relate to most. As a kid, I came in here, you don't know where you belong for the longest time. And eventually when you figure it out, you realize you don't belong anywhere. You don't belong in the Afghan community, you don't belong in the American, and you eventually settle the idea that that's okay, and you make a space for yourself. But to do that, you have to have a supportive environment. So I'm gonna stop there. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was excellent. That was really clarifying. And Usama, can you add to that from your experience working with this community about the practical problems that they face arriving in the United States and adjusting?
Yes, sure. First, I would like to again thank Kayla, and thank you, Patrick, and thank Sacramento State University to put this program together and to allow the community to learn about this very important topic. I really appreciate your efforts. To echo what Gulshan said, which she and I working very closely, almost on a daily basis, to address the needs for the refugee community. It is not only the problems arise in terms of after the 90 days, but there are also a pattern in the type of problems that get progressing over the time. So in the very beginning of their arrival to the society here, everything for them is abstract. They don't know who is who and who is helping, who's to trust, who's to actually work with. They have no idea. Even the people that they are actually interacting with, they get emotionally attracted from the resettlement agency in the very beginning, in the very few weeks that the caseworker receive them at the airport or a representative, and then they keep helping them in doing the paperwork. And then suddenly when they actually realize that now they start to be on their own to actually address all the needed support for living in this society, while they don't know anything about the system of living, and they don't speak the language, and they don't really understand where to go. So this actually creates an immediate, trauma added to their trauma that they are they came with it from back home. So it is, I just want to let the audience know that these people, when they arrived here, they thought that this would be the end of their suffering. And that for them is something that is a major, major relief. But when they start to engage in the daily demanding of everyday responsibility that each one of us, you and I, are facing on a daily basis in our normal life, and each one born and raised here are facing, and they find themselves the need to deal with these demands on their own, that create another higher level of stress and a higher source of trauma that they have never expected to happen. So let me just briefly identify a few of the key points that they are facing as a challenge when they arrive, and how this evolved into new challenges when they actually stay for a few years after that. The first challenge after they arrive is the language barrier, as Gulshan mentioned. And then when the lucky ones who are actually can receive the cash aid from the county and they have some sort of immediate income, they found that this is not sufficient to pay the rent. So, initially the resettlement agencies, they receive what's called welcome money from the government to rent the initial long-term home for them, to pay the deposit and the first couple of months rent. But when this is done, then they rely 100% on the revenue that comes from the county, from the cash aid. But this is most of the cases not sufficient, especially these days. They also found themselves that they need to have transportation that is not easy for them to navigate through the transportation system that we have here. And so they have to have a car. So they don't have money to buy the car. So that's another challenge in transportation that they face, that the community at certain point, some of the organizations come together and help in providing that, but on a very limited basis, unfortunately. When they even get the apartment from the resettlement agencies, they don't have enough household items to survive with, to use. So they have, shortage of household items that they need to have to use for daily life. They don't know how to go to do shopping because they don't know how to communicate in the grocery stores. And additionally, their kids get enrolled immediately into public schools. and they don't really know how to deal with the public education system here. They have no clue about the demands of the attendance and the children when they attend the school. They don't know anything about the education system and the school rules. And, but on the top of that, there is a major source of trauma especially for the schools in middle and high schools, that they place the children in those levels based on age, not based on knowledge. And our school system does not realize that many of these children, they were absent from education for years, let alone that they don't speak the language. So when these kids get into the school system, they find themselves isolated, unfortunately, because they understand they cannot go with the flow of education in the classroom when a subject being taught in front of them. I personally, I attended with a few of the children, one day in the classroom to help integrating them with the new environment for them. And it's very natural that the teacher would actually ask me to sit with the students at the end of the classroom so that we do not interrupt and disrupt her, teaching with the rest of the class. As I was, doing, translation and explain little things of what being taught. But what I realized later that the following days, she was putting the same student in the back of the classroom by himself, not integrating him into, engaging him into the classroom. So he came and complained. I mean, I don't do anything there. I'm really isolated. So that's one of the challenges that those children of the refugee families, when they arrive here, they develop, unfortunately, once they start to get their public education. But on the long term, once the family is staying here for a few more years, with the continuous challenges that they're facing, the father is still not being able to find a decent job to generate enough revenue to sustain his family. The mother still doesn't speak the language. The children are struggling in the school. So guess what this will create inside the household? It creates tension. It creates, arguments. It creates a lot of, heated discussions among the parents and the children, especially if the children are teenagers. That adds a whole new host of arguments in terms of behaviors that start to be changed on the children that the parents may not, agree with. So as a result of that, we start to see, unfortunately, some sort of, husband and wife conflicts at house, and start to see parent-teenager conflicts inside their families. And this, unfortunately, in certain cases, results in domestic violence, unfortunately, for some of the families, which is create another whole host of level of challenges for the entire family. So instead, my point I'm trying to make to the audience that instead of these families arrive here and to the dreamland that they have been hearing about, and they start to develop a whole new life for themselves, they get faced with these obstacles that they find themselves, involved with and dealing with on a daily basis, that push back on their dream and push back on their hopes. That's why the level of mental health, problems that arise on their, all levels, whether adults or children, is become significantly higher and higher from all these stressors that they are dealing with and facing. And that's why, organization like, Mass SSF with Gulshan's work is actually, it's very essential to help in addressing those mental health, providing healing and counseling for them. And that's why we need to have much more efforts in that direction down the road. And I will talk later about what we are actually doing to supplement and help with that.
Thank you very much, Usama. And Ahmad, I noticed that you were nodding a little bit during some of the comments he was making, and I want you to feel free to weigh in with your own experience about that. But for now, I'm going to talk to or address this issue of trauma with Gulshan, because this to speak of refugees is to speak about levels and layers of trauma. And can you speak for a moment about the work of the Muslim American Society, your social services foundation? Are there cultural barriers that keep many Afghan refugees, from men and women, from seeking support for the kind of challenges that Osama was just talking about?
Absolutely. And I think Osama covered a lot of the areas when it comes to how trauma shows itself once they're here. But I'm going to try to do this really quickly because trauma is a very big topic. So just to, again, to provide some context, you have people coming in that basically have had trauma for the last 40 years, right? Over 40 years. You have people who are born, raised, and gone older in war. So you can only imagine the effects of that. So when they come here, it doesn't mean that that stops. There's Islamophobia at a very high level in the US and around the world. And there's also, including lots of other discrimination. So it only doubles down on that. But when you look at just an Afghan family coming into the US with all this trauma and not knowing and starting a whole new life, if you look at in terms of how trauma works, it is well known through research that it does not leave you unless you actually do something about it, meaning that the trauma that's been inflicted on you, and if you take a mother who is pregnant, right, and who has a child, that has the ability to move down to the child as they are living in the US, if they do not seek services. And this is where it's very, very important. You have to be able to know what's happening to you, so understand trauma. Then you have to know how to seek services. And then on top of that, there has to be a system that responds to the services that you need. And what I'm referring to here is culturally competent, relevant services. So when you currently, there's already within the Afghan culture, there's cultural understanding that you do not go outside of your family to ask for help. To be able to come here and deal with everything that you're dealing with, and then start to seek services, it's almost unheard of in our communities. But then you're forced to do that because of the trauma and the way that it shows itself as you live in the US. And I'll give a quick example of how it manifests itself, and then I'll talk about how the agency that I work at supports and hopefully removing some of that trauma or supporting them. So if you take an Afghan family, and again, this is from a personal experience and the Afghans that have been here 30 plus years like myself or even more, you take an Afghan family and you look at the ones 30 plus years that have been here, and you look at them from the outside, it seems all well, everything is great. But then when you look inside and you really look at all the families, the problems that are happening are at very, very scary levels. For example, because of the trauma that they've had and they don't know how to identify it and understand it, they go through, of course, integration issues when they're living here. And then that starts to have issues with their daily lives in terms of, let's say, choosing a partner, living a life here and making sure that you live as an Afghan, as a Muslim, and then also connecting to your parents and to your peers and actually belonging in a community that now is your new home. On top of that, you run into other issues in terms of mental health that shows it comes out in different ways. For example, many of the Afghan families will have a lot of challenges within in terms of domestic violence. There's also in terms of substance abuse. There's also issues with the generational gap between the parents and the children. And so, again, I'm not here to represent the whole Afghan community, but from what I've seen in my professional experience and the cases that we get at Mass SSF, it shows, these are some of the things that are happening. But these different things occur all the time, but for a community and a family to understand why that's happening, generally they blame it on, well, maybe you're not a good Muslim, maybe you don't follow your faith enough, maybe you're not a good Afghan, or maybe you're not a good daughter or son. So all these challenges, that's how they community understand it. In reality, it is trauma that is showing in a very sad and slow way. And I use this example a lot, and every single time it gets to me personally, because they go through these problems and they have lots of challenges. However, at no point do they realize where it's coming from. So it shows itself in families really breaking up, really having high-level divorce, domestic violence. And so I think one of the biggest things we can do is try to help and help the community understand what this trauma is doing to them. To be able to, so at least they know that, and they don't blame themselves. As human beings, we generally pick on our own selves and feel guilty about what's happening, and look at everything, and naturally as human beings, we label each other. But the reality of it is, it's all trauma. And it just tears up families to the point that it's extremely sad. And so this is just an example of what actually happens. And this is not just pertaining to Afghan families. It's the same with Arab families who are from refugee communities, Syrians, Iraqis, Palestinians, and of course, Pakistani Indians who are immigrants, but still have these challenges in our community. And so some of the ways that MASF is able to help with this, trying to look at my watch to finish up quickly here. Some of the ways that MASF helps is developing programs that could respond to these needs. So MASF, which is officially the Muslim American Society Social Services Foundation, has been around for over 14 years, but it was all volunteer run until really 2014 when we really got to start receiving funding and developer programs and making the infrastructure of the organization strong. It started simply because there was no organization that was dealing with families who are going through these challenges that I just mentioned in the Afghan family. And so for those reasons, this started, and we have since 2007, we have developed programs with one goal in mind: to keep families together. And we do this by providing services in 5 languages, which is English, Arabic, the 2 Afghani languages, Dari Pashto, as well as Urdu. And because there's a high population of these individuals in Sacramento and overall California. And then also we keep 2 other things in mind when we provide these services: prevention and intervention. So we try to develop programs that really prevent individuals from having the trauma that they've already incurred for becoming worse, and then intervention, meaning actually having services that are culturally competent. So services that actually relate to individuals to go towards recovery and go towards healing and dealing with what they have gone through for so many years. And very quickly, the 5 programs we have, and I think the first one is the most important. It's Shifa for today. It's a peer support program. Shifa in Arabic means healing, and it's a program that's funded by Department of Public Health, where we have developed a program that is based on an evidence-based practice, peer support. And this is research that 49 out of 50 states are signing on to now, to say that when a person who's gone through lots of trauma, they could actually seek support from a peer specialist or peer support program, and hopefully, it would intervene from them becoming seriously ill. What I mean by that is a lot of the Afghans come in with lots of trauma. And if you have the, competent, culturally, linguistically, and religiously competent services, it actually could stop them from becoming clinically ill, which is where then they are diagnosed and then we taking medication and so forth. So with MASF, we have trained 68 community members who speak up to 10 languages. And these are individuals who go through 80 hours of training and continued training, culturally competent training. And the goal here is that when a community member calls us, we do an assessment. We talk to them in language, whatever language they can speak. And I have trained staff. I have close to 14 staff that are able to provide support, and 68 peer specialists. And out of the 68, 20 are Afghan. And we can go ahead and actually say, hey, what is the challenge you're going through? All right, now, here's the peer specialist. You choose who you're comfortable with. This is important because healing only starts from comfort. And so for that reason, we have, the client, as we call them, the community member in need, choose who they want to talk to. Many times Afghans, if they could speak English, they're not going to choose an Afghan peer specialist because the stigma. Going and asking for help outside of your family takes a lot of courage. And so if they can speak English, they'll choose someone else. Maybe they'll choose one of our Arab speaking peer special or Pakistani or Indian or any of them that we have. And that's our biggest program. And I think that's the most important. And if anyone that you know that needs support with this, with any problems they're going through, I encourage you to reach out to us. And then very, very briefly, the other programs we have also complement the community to complement the Shifa for Today program to be able to help with support. And that's community education. We have workshops, trainings we develop again in 5 languages. The point of this is to create education and create awareness. We have 2 youth programs, Amala, which means it's a hope, it's a warm line, so open 5 nights a week. For youth to talk to other youth. We also have a senior program. And then we have many other efforts that are underway. And again, our goal is to keep families together. And so we try to do these. And what mass stuff is, when you look at mass stuff and what it provides, it's there, and God knows thousands of nonprofits. But what makes us unique is that whether it's our board, myself, my team of staff, or peer specialists, we speak the language, we understand the religion, and at the same time, and this is the most important is we have been through this ourselves on a personal level. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Gulshan. I think you really passionately represented the problems for our audience. And our audience is mostly students here, and there's a lot of them. And I think what I want to do in turn in the last few minutes, before we get to Q&A, and I'm sure there are going to be a lot of questions, is how our audience can get involved in a meaningful way to help and to, besides being educated about the conditions of the community and their needs, what practical things that they can do to help. And I'm going to turn first to Osama and then back to you, Ahmad, about what kind of practical things that members of our audience could do to help. Osama, I'll start with you. Oh, you're muted, sir.
Okay. Thank you, Patrick. I believe that one of the key challenges that refugees have been facing when they arrive after they get the initial assistance was how to navigate with the system here. And that's actually how REDA started. And the very first project that REDA started was to establish the Refugee Service Center, where we provided the daily support for helping each family and each individual to navigate through the system here. And this is, until today, is our main project that we are supporting and we are working in. Originally, we wanted to help them to be self-sufficient, but for the overwhelming demands and needs, to help them in addressing everyday logistics in their lives, dealing with the applications, dealing with the landlord, dealing with the education, dealing with the social services in the county, dealing with the government. All of these entities, they don't find the resources to help them to deal with. And that's the core objective of our service center. But recently, we were very proud to actually get engaged in another very important program, which is we started to, through the services that we provide, start to utilize that to actually identify those who might be on the virtue of actually having serious mental health problem, so that we can later on refer them to organizations like Gulshan's organizations and others who are actually provide the counseling and the healing for them. So we're working with the County of Sacramento Department of Mental Health. We established this program first for the Arabic-speaking community, but we are looking forward now to add and expand it to address same pattern and the same model for the Afghan community, because what we do when they come to receive the service, we actually ask them a few questions. And when from the questions, when we identify that there is a sign that they need to be evaluated by counselors, then we have actually a professional licensed counselor clinician counselor that do the assessment for them. And then once she define or identify that they need further help, then we refer them to the proper help that they need, whether it's peer counseling through mass SSF, or they have a more major problems like suicide thoughts, for example, which is some of them. Unfortunately, in the last year, we already went through 3 cases of suicide thoughts for the trauma that they've been building so far, which is completely shocking, because this is against even their faith and the religion that they believe in. But the point is that this is another program that is very, very essential and needed. And the third program that we're actually helping with and putting together right now is to help the students in high school and middle school. So we are building a program, we call it homework club, which is going to be assisting the students to actually cope and learn how to navigate with the education process here, and help how to do their homework, learn the tools that exist online to help them, and also explain some of the subject that they are struggling with in the public school system. So through those 3 key programs that are right now are the core function of our operations, and we are also very grateful to we just got another resource to support in providing some sort of different type of healing to them, in addition to what Gulshan is providing in professional counseling. But we're also going to be organizing very soon some trips to nature to take those families to actually be able to relieve some of the stresses that they're going through. And this is going to be starting next year. So through these programs, I really encourage the community to come forward and participate. Let me just conclude with one. I know I'm over time, but let me conclude with one point. I'm an engineer, but I really don't see the joy and the happiness in my life from working as an engineer, because I'm doing that just for paying my bills. But the real joy and the real happiness that I'm really earning in my life is the sense of purpose when I put a smile on a child and I alleviate a burden from a family, parents, or a father or a mother. If you join us to actually sense that and taste that feeling, you will find that you are actually away from something that will really put a sense in the purpose of your life here as a human being. So I encourage our audience to come and join us.
Thank you for sharing that resource very practically. I want to ask Amada a little bit about the work of the Afghan Development Club, and as a student here at Sac State, and as somebody who, you're the age of many of the people that are listening to us today, fellow students. Tell us what the Development Club is doing and how people can help.
Oh, thank you. So as a president of Afghan Student Clubs, our main goal was to reach out to the Afghan families or Afghan students and look to their struggles and provide them assistance, continue their education. Our goal was not just inside the United States, but also in Afghanistan. For a lot of students, we were providing the books to the students and reaching out to them what struggle they are and what are their needs. So based on that, we approached them, and you also had some of the assessment on the last summer to provide them, and that they can continue their education. But right now is everything got changed, and I'm totally worried about the thousands and thousands of those who work in the last 20 years for a better future. But right now they are gone back to the darkest and unexpected and unwanted situation. So under the Taliban regime, I don't think a lot of things are going to happen. As we see, there was 50 countries, they all got out from Afghanistan. And I don't think under Taliban regime, we will have a better education or a lot of opportunity for the students. They can do all their education based on their want to. But we will see in the future. So what we can do and how we can provide them as Afghan, and in the case of as Afghan student president, and also I have one of the non-organization by name Speedo, which we provide the empowerment education, sustainable empowerment education for especially for Afghan women. Our focus is to provide them to awareness of education and related to the United States, and they can build their credit, and they can look in the future like what's really in an advanced world. So our program is our program of SPEED is right now is active, and right now we're looking for some of the volunteering donations so we can get some assistance from the people, or we can also to provide to those immigrants or Afghans they are in need of. So for example, like most of the immigrants people, they are like rely on a government assistance for a long period. So we want to assure that they can self-sufficient to by employment or by their own work for the future, and if they keep to just continue their life, yes, the government provide them it. So in the future they may get struggled. They won't get this kind of aid in the future, and that's the reason we want to bring the SPEED non-organization to help them on their education level and self-training. And I think that's all I can say. I will share the link and information in case if you guys want to look on that. I'm actually the president or the co-founder for that non-organization. So our focus more on the education level. And thank you. I'm going to start here.
Okay, thank you. I've noticed in the chat that there's a great interest in information about all your organizations and some of the things you've shared. At the end of this session, we're going to have a PowerPoint up that has information linking to all of these things. I'm paying attention to the time here, and we only have about 20 minutes left or so. So I do want to turn it over to Q&A, and Kayla, I believe, has been monitoring the questions that have come in. But before, Kayla, you turn to your first question, Gulshan, could you share information about the domestic violence new shelter quickly, and then we'll do the Q&A.
Sure. Thank you. So just last week, actually, there was the first Muslim domestic violence shelter was opened up in Sacramento. It is called Amana House, and so we'll have the information up and we'll share it with you. Basically, it's a collaboration between Mass SSF and My Sister's House, Al Mizbah, Ikna, and Masjid An-Nur. So basically, this is where we'll be able to provide service and supports that are culturally competent for women who are going through domestic violence. And yeah, thank you.
Okay, great. And if you've had, there's been a number of comments in the comment section, but if do we have any questions, Kayla, for the panelists that you want to share?
Yeah, so we have a question right here, and I think it would be good for either Gulshan or Dr. Razavi to maybe address this one. And the question is, what is the current status of women in Afghanistan since the Taliban takeover? And maybe you could just provide some information about the implication for women's rights. Yeah.
Gulshan, do you want to talk about that, or?
I'll have Dr. Saha go ahead first, and then I'll give my opinion. She's more of an expert.
Okay.
Well, there are a couple of developments that are definitely of note. So when the Taliban took over, we heard a lot of, oh, this is Taliban 2.0. This might be different. Let's wait and see. And for longtime observers of Afghanistan, most of us knew that that was ridiculous. We know who the Taliban are. We know where they are coming from and what their goals are. So recently they announced that in contrast with what they had been telling people in recent months, that girls over the age of 12 would not have access to education, for example. They've been turning women away from their jobs. They've been just not very slowly contracting civil society for women and for girls. Now, at the same time, I also want to acknowledge here that any kind of war, whether it's the war on terror or any kind of ground invasion or a drone, any kind of war, including financial warfare, economic warfare, it disproportionately impacts vulnerable populations. And that's women, children, elderly, disabled, poor and working classes. And that's no different here. So the United States, the coalition of military forces that were in Afghanistan were responsible for pretty heinous and systematic abuses against Afghan civilians and particularly against women and girls. And recently the United States asked the International Criminal Court not to prosecute war crimes against Afghan civilians that may have been committed by service members and to suspend their investigations. And we expect that that's a request that's going to be honored. It's extremely troubling and it's very tragic, and it only further amplifies the overall message of dehumanization and destabilization that we've been receiving about Afghans and Afghanistan, and where the United States stands on that population. So as far as where it stands for women, it was not wonderful under US occupation of Afghanistan. That's the reason I mention it. We definitely need to acknowledge here that the impact of the Taliban takeover is devastating, but it also is not as if it was a utopia for women prior to that. It's not as if US troops, the presence of US troops brought some kind of harmony and gender equality. War damages people, and the most vulnerable are the people who are damaged the most. And usually that is those populations that I mentioned, including women and children. So, we want to, so here I want to say that in answer to the question that things are not good, they were never good in the last 40 years, right? But they are also, women are certainly on the ground. Women in Afghanistan are fighting back. There are women who are pushing back against these measures that the Taliban is instituting. And I think that one thing that is really important for us, those of us who want to support them, to keep in mind is that support in this instance is to support those who are already doing the work on the ground there, rather than coming at it from this kind of Orientalist mindset that we often see here in, again, public rhetoric about it, that we somehow are going to bring democracy and gender equality to a place that we really weren't concerned about before. We saw that it was in our interests to go there. And so, so I want to, I'll stop it there. There's a lot more that needs to be said and can be said about this, but I want to, I want to turn it over to Gulshan to talk about this more. I'm sure that she has much more information about this than I do in terms of what's happening on the ground.
Thank you. Gulshan?
Yes, so just very briefly, I think it's a huge topic. So I'm giving an opinion based on being an Afghan woman and being raised here, but being from Afghanistan. And so, and also acknowledging that I've had a privileged life living here since I was a kid. So having said that, I think war, as Dr. Razavi already stated, does a lot to an individual that we cannot understand until you've been in there. And the most vulnerable do get impacted the most, and that's usually women and children. So that needs to just be understood, just because that's what happens, whether we like it or not. But with that said, the part that I want to add to is that as a female, whether you're in Afghanistan or any country, we're always the topic of, are we oppressed, what we should do and what we should not do. And it's always everyone that has an opinion and not the ones who are being effective. And so the only thing I'm going to say is that I encourage everyone to just look at it from a perspective that is beyond what is shown in the US media, that Afghan women or Muslim women are always oppressed, because that is not the case. And of course there are those who are, but in general, it is not the case. It is the woman who chooses what they want to do. And if that is, getting education, how they dress, what they wear, it is that individual that decides. But generally, the part that frustrates me the most all the time is that women are seen in one light when it comes to war or any case, and including the Afghan crisis. And what you see on TV and what you hear, it is not the truth. But at the same time, there are people who are being affected. So just considering that, what you see on the US media is not the only thing that is happening, I encourage you to look at other sources and be able to understand what the real experience of those individuals. So I'm just going to stop there. But thank you.
Thank you for that question, and thank you for those very thoughtful responses to it. A very complicated and misunderstood and very important issue that we see a lot of media attention to, and it's constructed in ways that are not always insightful. Kayla, do we have another question?
Yes, we do. So we might just have time for this one more question, because I do want to make sure to share with everybody the resources at the end of this presentation so they could take note. And I did want to address real quick that we will be sending all the materials for links and resources and volunteer opportunities to all of the people who registered today for this event. So be on the lookout for that. And we will be hosting more programming with the Multicultural Center surrounding Afghanistan, and it will try to address some of the topics that we talked about in more detail. So, okay, so the question that I received is, what cultural traditions, demeanors, and behaviors should we be sensitive to when befriending and helping new Afghan refugees?
That's a great question. And I'll put it out to whoever. Imad, do you have any thoughts about that? If somebody's saying, what are the traditions and sensitivities that students, befriending and reaching out to Afghans in our community, what should people be aware of and thinking about intentionally? And I don't need to put them on the spot, but anybody, yes.
Yeah, so based on my views, I think Afghan families, they are very friendly. Any case, they don't care about any kind of religion or culture. So with in any way, if you want to reach out, just go talk to them, and they can tell them your expectation and what you want, so that definitely can play you back on the situation you expecting from them. So they are very calm and they're very relaxed people. So because they've been in the struggle with and war for a long time, and when they came here, so they're feel we are safe right now. So, and they're excited to meet new people actually. That's what this thing is about Afghans. They're excited.
Thank you. Go ahead, Gushan.
Yeah. Yes, as Imad already said, we're known for hospitality for sure, but as Afghans, a few things that I've noticed just being in the US and being from Afghanistan, in terms of mannerism, we're from a collective society, so we're always taught to be very quiet, calm, and keep to ourselves. So if you are saying hello or anything to any Afghan, if they don't respond or don't smile, it's because that comes from the culture. It doesn't mean that they don't enjoy it. Certainly saying salam to them, also, of course, smiling, all of these things welcomes them, but also acknowledging some of the gender roles. So for example, we're taught in our cultures, and I learned this at a very later age in the US, is eye contact. Women cannot, and men, they don't make eye contact. In the US, you're taught, look at the eyes when you're talking. So if you're talking to them and they're not looking at you, it's not because they're ignoring you, it's what they've been taught as a form of respect. And then also in terms of females, which, I'll speak to that. If they don't shake your hand, it's not something that's in the culture. We don't shake hands, we just say salam. And same with men, they keep their hands to themselves. There's not, if you reach out to shake their hand, they're not, some will not and some will, but if they don't, it doesn't mean they're being rude. They're not used to that. And of course, considering the whole thing about women who wear scarves and so forth, and just the distance and so forth, and being respectful about that. It's all because that's what, in a collective society, you're always told to just be quiet, be to yourself, and speak when you're spoken to. But in the US, it's the total opposite. We're very outspoken. We want to say hello and smile, and we don't really watch for the gender roles because we just want to be welcoming to everyone. But it's not the case, and it takes them for a little while, but they do learn it. So I just want to share that.
Usama, did you want to share a thought on that? Oh, you're muted again, sir.
Sorry for that. I just would like to add that also be mindful that especially in schools, when teenagers that they just arrived or they don't speak the language, that they actually, the way that they communicate, it's not because they don't want to engage with you, but it's because they lack the understanding of the culture here and understanding of the language in many cases. This culture is extremely social culture. They live together. They cannot stay alone by themselves. They have to be surrounded by the extended family and the friends and the neighbors. That's how they live together. So, but when they come to our, local culture here, and they face what they're facing in terms of barrier of language. So some of us may tend to think that they are actually, they're not social. They don't want to talk to me. They don't want to speak with me. They don't want to interact with me. But actually, it's the opposite. They would love to interact. They would love to communicate, but it is just that they have obstacles that prevents them from doing so. That's one aspect. And I just want to share a piece of information that we at TREDA, we have recently consistent meetings with some of the county departments to share some of the challenges that the students are facing in schools. And one of the programs that we are encouraged to be developed is to actually provide culturally, workshops and training at the school level to the teachers and to the classmates, so that we can actually educate them about how to, what to expect from that, culture, and how to integrate, and how to come together, and how to alleviate some of the myth that some of the classmates may have about some of the students that they see because of the impact of media and so forth. So that's something that's coming up.
Thank you. I'm going to turn it back to Kayla. I think we're out of time, but from the bottom of my heart, I really want to thank everybody, the panelists and the students and the community members that were here. It's hard to just jump in quickly in 75 minutes into something so complex and so important, but I think thanks to you, we've made really a good start, and there will be more programming related to this. So Kayla, I will turn it over to you with, again, real heartfelt thanks to everybody for giving your time here today.
Thank you so much, Patrick. I want to thank Dr. Ettinger again for being our moderator for today's event. And a huge thank you to our wonderful panelists for sharing with us today their knowledge and insight. And thank you also to everybody who left a question. I will get to those questions and relay them to our panelists. And feel free to email me and I can relay those to the panelists. So we will now pull up a page of links and resources that today's panelists have mentioned or are involved in. If you have any additional questions for them, please send it to the email address on the screen. As a reminder, this event has been recorded and it will be posted on the Strategic Student Support Program's YouTube channel. Before we end our event, I would like the audience to complete the following poll. Let me just pull that up. And this will just help us get an idea for our programming for our next events. So I'll just give you a second to complete that.
Kayla, while they're completing the survey, I just want to mention that our website being actually revamped right now. So if they go to our website, it may not be function. So I just wanted to bring this up to the audience. It is in transition period right now.
And I'll just say that in addition to these resources, if anybody's having trouble making any connection whatsoever, email me and I'll personally follow up.
Yeah, I'll provide all of those links and emails in the follow-up email that I sent to all of the registrants. So keep a lookout for that email. And really quick, once again, I just want to say if you're a Sac State student here to receive credit for leadership initiative, we will post that in the chat box right now. So you could sign up and get credit for this. Once again, I want to thank you for joining us. To the educators, allies, and advocates, thank you for your dedication and commitment. To our students, we stand with you and will continue to find ways to support you by remaining informed and engaged. Sac State is your home and your second family. And to the Afghan folks who are listening to this panel, we stand in solidarity with your community. And take care of everybody. Thank you for attending this event and have a great rest of your day.